It's our sesquicentennial. This is episode 150 of Poll Hub, and there is plenty to talk about. If things in America seem more chaotic to you than at almost any time in your life, you're not alone. We dig into new polls on race, the economy, the pandemic, and more. And then the president does not like a recent CNN poll, not one bit. He called on them to retract it, they aren't, and then tweeted out a frankly absurd memo from one of his own pollsters. And we cannot wait to dissect this gem of taking literary license. Happy 150th to us and our listeners. Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion. And happy 150th to us. Jay, could you say what it is again? I just like to.
It is a sesquicentennial.
You do that so well.
I wish I said that.
I wish I said there we
that.
go.
Okay.
So we'll put that aside because we've probably all had birthdays that landed at inopportune times where you didn't feel like having a birthday party, and I would say that would pretty much describe our American situation right now. Not really feeling like a 150th birthday party for Poll Up, but we are
You celebrated one just a few days ago, but I don't think it was as high as the 150.
It was not a sesquicentennial. No, I don't even want to think about that.
Birthday,
anyway,
even though you didn't feel like celebrating.
Yes. Thank you. And I didn't very much, and that's fine. At this age, I try not to. But there have been a slew of polls. We've talked about this the last couple of weeks that are really doing a good job of capturing, because there's so many questions being asked, really do a good job of capturing the mood of Americans. And the word this week is chaos. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Barb, do you want to start? Are you a supporter of chaos, or do you want me to? I'll say one thing right off the bat: race relations. Let me talk about that. And that is, there's been a series of polls, obviously, in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, and clearly, what's gone on here is that if you look at the cumulative nature of the polls, people say it's a big problem, and it's not isolated. And I think that's a really interesting finding from the polls because, even in our poll, the Marist poll, which we had, I guess we spoke about in the last podcast, people are saying this is a major issue, that this was not unlawful with the protests. In fact, they're protests, not riots. I mean, I think it's surprising that the efforts in the Black Lives Matter movement are seen as legitimate, and the polls are showing that, and there's a whole slew of polls to that effect. So I think that this is kind of like unusual to find the nation reacting to these, what's been going on in the aftermath of this.
Although I don't think that Americans are, pointing a finger at the protesters and coming up with this feeling of chaos. No. I think it's a cumulative feeling of just a combination, a confluence of factors that have come together that I really can't remember, in my adult lifetime, where you have a pandemic, you have protesting, racial unrest, but racial unrest is kind of not even capturing it because it's unrest and a concern by Americans overall over the killing of George Floyd. It really just was the tipping point, I think, for this issue that has been certainly a part of this country for a very long time. And then the economy. You have nearly 40 million people unemployed. So if you look at pretty much all aspects of American life, I don't think it's surprising that you see that 80% of registered voters in the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll think that things in the United States are out of control. And Gallup registered actually its highest dissatisfaction with the direction of the country. And one of the numbers that I thought was really interesting there is that in February, before everything really started on this downward trend, the sense of the direction of the country was incredibly positive. It's been a partisan issue, certainly, during the Trump administration and the Obama administration. But since February, in February, 80% of Republicans thought that the country was moving in the right direction. Now, in the latest Gallup poll, 39% feel that way. That's just a dramatic change, and really almost incomprehensible in terms of numbers that we've seen in just these few months.
I think there's one kind of caveat here, though, because when we look at the number that you talked about there, about the out of control, sense of out of control, 80% of Americans, registered voters, excuse me, think that the United States is out of control, or things in the United States are out of control. 66% of Republicans say that, and 92% of Democrats. I don't think that they think it's the same things that are out of control. I think this is one of these questions that you ask, and people interpret it to mean something different depending on who you're talking to. So Democrats may think it's out of control because the protesters are protesting racial inequality and the coronavirus is spiking again. And Republicans might think, oh, it's rioters in the streets and it's the government's efforts to clamp down on their civil liberties and their free association by making them
and the economy too.
That's what I was going to get to is the economy. That's the common ground, right? Democrats and Republicans are both, I would think, here feeling the same way about the economy, that it is in more trouble than we had thought 3, 4, 5 months ago.
30%, to your point, Jay, but 30% of Republicans thought the protests were lawful. And I thought that was really an unusual number. And I think to get to what Barb's point, there's kind of like this exhaustion we're feeling. Someone tweeted that this is like having the flu of 1918, the Great Depression, and the Vietnam War all occurring at the same time. And if people are feeling a certain overload politically and in terms of social media and all those other modes of communication that we have, I mean, that's where it's coming from. I want to throw one thing at you guys, though, on this before we leave race relations and maybe talk a little bit more about the economy and the pandemic. But I do want to say the word that's been used lately is about defunding the police department. Now, I haven't seen any polls on the use of the word defunding, but I think my guess is that might be a trap for Democrats because if people interpret that as meaning eliminating and closing police departments, there's a lot of Black people who would be opposed to that, as well as, I assume, majorities across the country. So I don't know. What's you guys' take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how that plays out and how that's used. I'm actually a little surprised that hasn't taken off more in the 5, 6, 7 days since that has really gained traction. I'm really surprised it hasn't taken off more in Republican, talking points. But the other thing about this week that stands out to me is that we are talking about coronavirus again. And remember, we only talked about coronavirus on this podcast and everywhere for months. And then 2 weeks ago, we stopped talking about it because there were much bigger things that were happening. Maybe not bigger, but things that were newer and that were taking all of our attention. We're back to talking about coronavirus, at least in part because there are these spikes in cases and hospitalizations, which are two different measures. And there's lots of discussion about which one is the best to look at. But in certain states, and not only in states that have opened up, it's in some states that have kind of held tight, it is spiking again too. So I think that coronavirus is coming back as a topic people are thinking about, and these polls demonstrate that. These polls show that Americans are still very concerned and not ready to go sit in a packed Applebee's and have a drink, with a crowd on a Friday night.
It's lower than its high of the concern that is. The high, I believe, was in April, around the mid 70s, where almost 8 in 10 Americans were concerned about COVID-19. But it seems to have settled in the mid 60s. And although it's not top of mind, because I think that in terms of the number one issue, I think the protests and race relations certainly not only had the headlines, but captured Americans' attention to. But it is really of concern as we look around the country and see these spikes of additional cases. And certainly the issue of health and concern about not only people's individual health, their families and their relatives, but there's the concern also about among workers who need to go back to work, and whether they feel that employers will go that extra mile and be able to get the equipment and the supplies that they need in order to have a safe workplace. Certainly, I think everybody's really very anxious to get back out of the house, but without treatment and a
vaccine.
There is certainly a lot of caution.
Yeah, well, Jay alluded to the absence of Republican talking points on the topic of defunding police departments, and
that's a nice segue. Well, this is a good.
Yeah,
segue.
You see it coming, and so here I'm thinking they have a president on their hands, Republican president, who's right now in a variety of polls at the lowest approval rating he's been, the highest disapproval rating in many polls, the highest number of people who strongly disapprove of him, as we found in our NPR PBS Marist poll. And maybe some of the Republican talking points right now are not to have too many talking points because things just aren't all that good right now for the president. Having said that, the president, reacted in the way he knows how to react. And the only way he seems to react consistently is by tweeting out a reaction to his favorite, whipping post, I don't know what the expression is, CNN. He likes to call them fake news. He doesn't like the poll that showed him trailing Joe Biden by 14%, which I might say was higher than ours, but is also more recent than ours. And a lot of polls out this past weekend, 6 or 7 of them, varying quality, all showed Joe Biden with a double-digit lead. And
so here's what he said in his tweet. I have retained highly respected pollster McLaughlin and Associates to analyze today's CNN poll and others, which I felt were fake based on the incredible enthusiasm we are receiving. Read the analysis for yourself. This is the same thing they and others did when we defeated crooked Hillary Clinton in 2016. There are suppression polls, he says. And then a memo from John McLaughlin essentially talks about several points that he raises to indicate that the polls, the public opinion polls, including ours, not by name, but including ours, are essentially underreporting Republicans. That's the gist of his argument.
Barb, are these polls underreporting Republicans?
Well, it's really interesting. And I think that when we have been looking at polls, probably pre-COVID race relations and this economic debacle of high unemployment. There could be an argument made for the fact that when we looked at the choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump for president, or any Democrat against Donald Trump earlier at that time, we saw a relationship between what pollsters measure as party identification, that is the number of Democrats and Republicans in the poll. And so right now, many more people nationally identify with the Democrat Party than the Republican Party. And so the argument that McLaughlin's making is that's not what happens on Election Day. But so when we looked at the toss-up, you could see that the difference in the toss-up was pretty close to party identification. So if there was 6 points more Democrat in the poll, the likelihood is that Biden was ahead of Trump by about 6 points. What happened this weekend, or last week really, was really a dramatic change in the polls. This time, the polls are pretty consistent in showing, mid to high single digit numbers, more Democrat than Republican. But instead of there being that kind of 1-to-1 between Biden and Trump. Now the CNN poll, just as an example, had an 8-point difference between Democrats and Republicans, but a 14-point lead for Biden over Trump, 55-41. And we saw that in poll after poll.
Way more than the margin.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think we did see quite a significant shift in the president's approval rating, in how Americans are viewing him, not necessarily among his most ardent supporters, but in voters and people who made the difference in 2016 and were willing to give Donald Trump the chance to lead the nation rather than Hillary Clinton.
We should clear up something in case anybody's confused about how party ID is determined, because there is, I think, a misconception that we do a poll and then we say, okay, well, 40% of them are going to be Democrats, 40% of them are going to be Republicans, or whatever it is. And that's not how it works. We ask, what party do you identify with? And that doesn't mean they're registered in that party. We're taking people's word for it. But what happens is that as a party becomes maybe unpopular or a figurehead in the party, people begin to, maybe they don't say they're Republican and they don't say, oh yeah, I'm a Democrat now. Maybe they go, well, I'm an independent.
That's right.
And so that's what's happening. We've seen this in other elections. We've seen this
Bush years. Back and forth between Democrats and Republicans.
Right. So this isn't new, and it's a kind of a silly argument from John, who knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's doing, but this reads like a memo to the guy who's paying your bills more than a memo.
But it is
fully honest.
Yeah, it is, and I think there is a very significant difference between pollsters who are political consultants and work to improve messaging for candidates and try to get candidates elected, and polling that is public polling, which is very transparent. You can go to any of these polls that were done by media organizations or other colleges and universities, and you can pretty much see how they did it, who they spoke with, and get all the numbers, dig deep behind the numbers and figure out exactly how they put it all together. That's not
which is how he was able to write. That's how he was able to write his memo criticizing it, is he was actually able to look at these and cherry pick numbers.
Yeah.
He also mentioned another thing, which was, these public polls are only interviewing registered voters. They're not interviewing likely voters. And I know
it's
this is a real sticking point for you. So do you want to jump in on this?
Well, Jay stole my thunder there. Yeah, it's too soon. I mean, they're interviewing adults. Then they're talking about registered voters. That's fine, because they find out people are registered or not. But to talk about likely voters 5 months out from an election, most pollsters who do quality polls know you can't determine that if for no other reason than you can't even anticipate what the get out the vote operation is of each of the candidates.
Or what the issue is going to be.
And we certainly have learned that in this particular election season. So you have this notion of that somehow you can find likely voters who, according to McLaughlin, would be more Republican. But even that would not do a whole lot to a 14-point lead, even if you were measuring a few more Republicans and bringing down the Democrats in some ways. But I wanted to say, look, what this is we're going to be talking about this. This is not the first time, although Donald Trump and McLaughlin clearly have, kind of driven it home in a big way. This is not the first election we've seen the skewering of polls. And we all lived through 2012 with the Obama-Romney race, when the Obama people thought Obama was going to win, and the Romney people thought Romney was going to win, and the media didn't know which group was right, and a lot of the public pollsters, ours included, were tipping it towards Obama, and that led to the Republicans charging that somehow these polls were being skewed in the Democrats' favor. We had a whole big thing going on in Ohio, where ultimately we were able to spike the football because we got it exactly right, to the surprise of the Republicans in that particular state, in that particular election. So having said that, we're not going to be done right now with CNN, Donald Trump, and John McLaughlin, or anybody else with the skewering of polls. the skewering season is only just begun. And we're going to probably get a lot more of it before this, the dust settles on 2020.
You think? Really? You think?
I think probably.
This is years of experience talking.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah. So that's what this rang for me. This smelt of 2012, and here we go again. And look, Donald Trump is having some re-election problems right now. Does that mean Joe Biden's going to win? No. But is Donald Trump now starting rallies again in states that are not expanding his terrain? Yeah, he's going out there in states that he has to carry. So follow where the candidates go, and you can sort of tell what their private polls are probably telling their campaign strategists about where things really are.
Well, that'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub Poll. It was a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Of course, none of us are on campus today. It wouldn't be right. We are social distancing as we always do. Mary Griffith is our executive producer, and she is remote producing. Casey Schaff is our editor. She will be remote editing, and Amelia Morell is our production assistant, and she is remote production assistanting. I got sesquicentennial right, but I can't do that.
and past week, we had one of our two annual meetings of the Board of Trustees of the Roper Poll, and we went through a whole lot of things. Roper Center, not Roper Poll. Roper Center.
Well, it used to be a Roper Poll.
And
now they archive all polls.
And those archives are held at Cornell University, and I can report that the archives of the Roper Center are alive and well and being used by lots of folks, both on these immediate topics, but also when they're searching back in time for things. So it was a great meeting that we had, and everything was going really well, and in a time when not much is going that well for a lot of folks.
Well, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us. You can get us on social media pretty much anywhere. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to learn a lot more about polling and the things we chat about each week, dive into the Marist Poll Academy. It's visual and it's free, and boy, you sound really, really intelligent at cocktail parties.
And if you take 150 years and add 250 to it, you get a quadricentennial. Darren, I can never say that.
You can't do it. Yeah.
Forget it.
So, hey, can Mary and Amelia and Casey all unmute, and then we can all say happy birthday to ourselves? Come on.
There they go.
Unmute. There we go. Okay. In 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday.
Be safe, everybody.